Okay, so yeah, my name is Blake Galbreath. I'm the assistant head of systems at Washington State University, and I'm here to participate in our Systems Librarianship 101 series. And in particular, I was going to talk about moving library data, metadata. And I wonder if I can move that a little bit. So the agenda more specifically is to talk about common record types that we use most prevalently in libraries, and then discuss getting data using existing tools versus situations where you might need to create your own tools. And then sort of the same thing, but with transforming and normalizing data. And if I do manage to leave time at the end of this presentation, I thought it would be a great idea to just crowdsource the audience and ask for, what other tips and tools you all use to move data around. Because certainly, well, one, I will have forgotten things, and two, there was no way I could really include everything anyway. So it'd be nice to just get a fuller sense of what's going on out there. Where is my stop share? Gonna need that. Okay. So common record types that we're using are basically MARC and XML. And in particular, XML, I thought I'd discuss a little bit more in depth because we end up using MARC XML, Dublin Core, and BibFrame. So MARC 21, MARC or MARC 21, by far, what most of our records are in the library world and where it all began, sort of the bedrock of library metadata. The acronym stands for Machine Readable Cataloging. In my opinion, the it's just pretty old and it's a little somewhat odd, somewhat wonky. And I think that that format was originally created to save space, which used to matter a whole lot more in the early computing days. And, you can usually spot a MARC record pretty easily by the fact that it has fields marked by tags and indicators and subfields. And also it has kind of a strange columnar format to it. Some fields are repeatable, others are not, and everything you ever wanted to know about MARC records, the rules governing them, what you can put in them, which are repeatable, etc., can be found at that URL, the Library of Congress URL /marc/bibliographic. And here is an example of the MARC record after it's put into the text format. And it's a little bit hard to, I guess, sort of really see the columnar display here, but because of the slide. But usually you can tell pretty easily that there are two columns, right? In the left column is the field name, which can be alpha or numeric, and then the right hand column is where all of the data comes, right? The indicators and the data and the subfields and all that stuff. So in this example, you can see the one we can get our head around, I think most easily is the 245 that represents the title field. The indicators in this case are not anything interesting. They're just zeros, but then you can see that the data within that field is separated into subfields and are delimited by the $ in this case. So you see $A is the main title, the ceramics of the indigenous cultures of South America. And then $B is the remainder of the title, usually the subtitle. And $C is usually the statement of responsibility, usually the editors, the authors, that kind of thing. Where it gets a little strange are in so those are the data fields. And then you also have the control fields, like the very first one, the LDR, which means leader or stands for leader. And it kind of tells you more about the format of the record and things like that. And this first string that comes after it, or this long string that comes after it, starting with 08 for 6 CAM, those are known as, or that's a string and they're divided into bytes. And so in particular, that's not quite what I meant. The sixth and seventh byte are A and M, and those essentially are lookup tables. So you have to go to that URL that we were looking at earlier. Let's see if we can just do that. And oh boy, pushing things that I don't want. And look up the leader, and then you go to those bytes, and then the sixth byte here tells you A is language material, and 7 is M, tells you it's a monograph. So essentially, this is just a very common record that is a book of words, right? A book of written words, as opposed to music or computer files or other things like that. So things that you will see very, very often. And moving into XML then. That's a format that's becoming more and more common, and I guess somewhat easy to use. I would say it's a little difficult at first, but once you get the hang of it, it starts to make more and more sense. It uses a parent-child node format so that all of the data fields in the XML document are nodes, and the sort of headers are the parents, and then anything that comes underneath them are children. So they have a relationship from one to the other, and you can walk through them. Um, any text editor can handle these. This is kind of opposed to uh, MARC files, which sometimes can be exported as binary files, and then you have to use a program called MARC-edit to break them into the text file that we were looking at earlier. But anyway, for XML, it's very simple. Any text editor can handle them, but one that uses syntax highlighting is like Notepad++, super useful for the things we do. One particular type of XML that we use a lot is Dublin Core. And what's different about I mean, one of the things that's very different, other than it being XML, is that at least in Dublin Core, the standard one, that you just have 15 terms to use to describe resources, and each element is optional and can be repeated. So I think one of the things you have to think about here is if you're ever tasked with converting MARC records or the data in MARC records to Dublin Core, you'd have to think a lot about mapping, right? Because the MARC records can have a potential, I don't think any of them ever do, but they have a potential of 999 fields. And so, you might end up having to push multiples of those into single fields here. And going back to the title example, right? We had 3 fields in that one, which had a main title and a subtitle. So that would easily go into this Dublin Core title, but then you would have to find someplace else to put the editors, et cetera, that kind of thing. And that's different from MARC XML, which is very straightforward, really. It's just MARC 21 records expressed in XML format. And if you look at this example here, starting from, I can't touch this or it'll zap to the next one. Starting from the leader line and going down, the control fields and the data fields are all the same type of information, they're just expressed slightly differently, right? In XML format instead of in that text file format. But they have some other things that will come above them, like the namespace declaration and the XML versioning, and then some parent groupings, right? So that they belong to a collection and they belong to a record and things like that. And then XML BibFrame is kind of the future of what's going on in libraries. It's a replacement framework for MARC, but not widely implemented yet. If you're not working at the Library of Congress or working on some kind of a testing group or something like that. But it is an initiative to evolve bibliographic description standards and to linked data model. And the biggest difference here in terms of the XML that you're going to see is that it's organizing, it's really transforming the data. It's not just transforming the format, but it's transforming the data into these conceptual organizations of work, instance, and item. And Library of Congress has this interesting tool that I thought would be fun to look at, where you can see how these conversions look. And so looking at that same MARC record, well, a version of that same record for the ceramics of the indigenous cultures of South America, So you see the MARC record is virtually the same, the 245 with the ABC, and the leader has the AM distinction again. But then you can go ahead and see what that's going to start looking like in Mark XML. Again, this is really just a transformation of its format. So you can see that the control fields and the data fields are all here. They're just looking differently for the most part. But then move this out of my way. You can see that the RDF or the BibFrame XML is drastically different. You can even see from the what are these scroll bars how long this this record ends up being, because a lot more information is being added to it, including link data and URIs and things like that. And you can see that the first instance, the work instance, or sorry, the work concept starts here. Starts here, and then there will be a lot of that. And then as you make your way down, see where the instance would start. Can't see what I'm typing though. And then eventually, obviously the item information will come after that. All right. So that's kind of our crash course in just the records that we have, that we're using, and that we probably will be using in the future. And now to talk more about actually migrating or moving records around. And this is just kind of my brief overview. So it seems to me that mostly what we're talking about here is either exporting data from an old system or grabbing them from some host, right? And then transforming the data to conform to a new system, and then ingesting within a new system. And that's basically the life cycle of, well, there can be other intermediary steps, but I think that those are at least the large concepts. All right. So it kind of occurs to me after I put this together that I'm really talking more about, I guess, external record types. Although I did start talking about MARC just as a baseline to understand, where we started, where we came from, and where we're sort of going as a result of that. But mostly I'm focusing on XML in the rest of mostly in the rest of the presentation. So one of the, excuse me. One of the ways that we can get XML, and especially Dublin Core XML, into the Alma Primo environment is through the OAI PMH protocol. And this is a ready-made user interface in Alma that's great to use, and really doesn't require much more than the OAI base URL and the set spec / name, right? So in this case, the very first line is the OAI base URL. That's our server for our content DM. And you can see the sort of the OAI.php service that's running on that. And that allows us to just go and talk to that server with the proper command or syntax. And then the set we're looking for is this association for women veterinarians bulletins. And then the part that's kind of cut off is the set spec code for that. Okay, so this is a very simple approach, or it's very easy to accomplish. They've made it, very accessible to us. But you don't always get that option. And so I thought it would be good to talk about what's actually going on behind the scenes in case you need to kind of create your own version of this so that you can get your own data in a different way. So, but to talk about that in general, I figure we need to back up and talk about what the OAI PMH, the basics of OAI PMH are, and the syntax that's used to go and get that information or those records. So the acronym itself stands for the Open Archives Initiative Protocol for Metadata Harvesting. and it requires a base URL that we've already talked about here. This is our content DM server. And then it requires some kind of syntax that you add to the end of that base URL. And some simple ones are illustrative ones here, like the verb equals list sets, and that'll just tell you everything that's sitting on that server. Or you can list the identifiers to get the record IDs, or you can get the records themselves with list records and also identifying the set that you're looking for. And it's a good way, just in general, to get data. But I think it's also a great way to just double check what data you might be expecting. So if you were able to use this, but you want to know ahead of time what the data looks like or will look like, what the format of it is and how many records you should be expecting, that kind of thing, to compare against when you get the report back from Alma. It's great if you have that ability to just go directly to that data and then have some knowledge ahead of time. So I thought we could, oh yes. Yeah, I'm just going to skip that first one because it doesn't work in Chrome for some reason. And just show you what data looks like. Okay, so this is the first list records URL that was on that slide. And if you put this into your browser, then you can come and look at the data and see, okay, what's the format going to look like? I know I'm going to have a list of records, and each record is going to have a header data, and it's going to have metadata data, right? And so you could choose if you wanted to only collect the metadata data if you wanted, or you could get the entire record. You can sort of do whatever you want once you know what you're looking for and can expect. And then you can also see how many records you're going to have by just checking the right tag. And so you can see in our find attempt that there would be 200 records on this page, and that's the default for the browser. It's going to show us 200 records at a time. And then if we want all of the records, we need to then use the resumption token syntax and the value from the resumption token field to go to the next page. And that is what is written here. Okay, and so now we're here. We see we get the same type of data, and we see we have 28 records. And usually a good idea to just kind of scroll to the bottom and see if any of them are actually posted as deletes. And in this case, you have 5 deletes. So looking for 228 records total, but knowing 5 of them will be reported back as deleted. And then so you'll probably get like a net of 223 records imported into your system in the report that Alma would give you back. So just a good to know ahead of time. And then tools that you could actually use to go get the data, right? So you could use the Alma interface if that's available to you, or you could even use OpenRefine. I'm sorry, that's really small, isn't it? And you can use the 2 URLs that you have within OpenRefine to very easily get the same information. The idea is that once you have these 2 URLs, you can kind of walk around in different programs and use them in different ways. It's just too much in my way. Okay, hit next. Get it to the point where those 2 URLs are single rows. and give it a name, test for demo or something like that. And so this is kind of a cheap API that you can just use. And then all you have to do is from this column, go to edit column and add column by fetching URLs. Give it any kind of column name, push OK. And then it takes about, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds or so to run through this. And then you will have a second column that is complete with all of the XML that we just saw on the Chrome browser pages. Okay, so there it is. You can export that and then you have files. Another way to handle this would be through MarkEdit. And I actually only learned about this about 6 months or 8 months ago or something when our good friend Kuhn posted something to a listserv. So I thought it was worth sharing in case anybody else didn't know. But I can't get rid of you guys. There we go. So I guess I'll back up since I did make a slide for this. So and just say that MarkEdit is an amazing program. It is known as your complete free Mark editing utility. You can get the downloads from that hyperlink created by Terry Reese, great supporter of libraries. It has a program, Mark Breaker and Mark Maker, that allows you to break those binary files and then make them again if you need. And you can convert between many data formats, Mark XML, Mark, Dublin Core, BibFrame, etc. But the thing we're interested in right now is the fact that it can also allow you to harvest OAI records. And it is available here under Harvest OAI Records. And all you need is the same kind of information in this case as in the Alma situation. So you need the server, you need the set spec, and you need to tell it where to go. Actually, you need to actually check this box though to download files. Push OK. And it's actually much faster than OpenRefine. At least it usually is. And then you have files and it'll tell you right here, oh, 228 files were exported and it used one resumption token, which by the power of arithmetic, we know means that you will have 2 files waiting for you because it used the resumption token once. And they will look like this. It'll just an XML file that says 200 and an XML file that says 1, and you'll have 200 records in this one and 28 in that one. And so very simple, very approachable, great tool. And this is the same thing here, just a screenshot of that. And as I said, it breaks your data into files per resumption token. Okay. The last thing that I wanted to mention is that now that you have those URLs at your disposal, you can just create a script yourself as well, right? So you could just name the first URL, URL1, and the second one, URL2, as variables, and then put them into whatever language you're used to using. In this case, it's PowerShell. So, and then create something that goes up, grabs that information, brings it back, and outputs it to a file. And then, so we have many ways to do things now that we know what's going on behind the scenes with the OAI PMH, right? Now, the question I guess you might be asking yourselves, though, is why go through the trouble to script something up when you have these other awesome tools at our disposal? Well, it seems, there are all kinds of reasons, but, tools don't always fully address the project, and perhaps the interface is broken or the exported data is insufficient. Perhaps someone else usually does this kind of thing at your library, but they went on vacation and forgot to leave you the keys to the kingdom or whatever. Or lastly, more likely, kind of in our situation, you might want to set up an automated data retrieval system, right? So something that can be repeatable, that you don't have to go back to the interface every time, but instead you can just run the script, or even put it on a server if you wanted to, that kind of thing. I don't think I wanted to do that actually. So, and my IRL example here is for creating a script that is, was our migration from DSpace to Esploro. So DSpace is an institutional repository. Esploro is marketed as an institutional repository plus, right? So it does other things as well. But at this point in time, I was interested in getting the data from the institutional repository data from DSpace to Esploro. Now, the problem we came across, though, was that at the time, I don't know what the current situation is, but at the time, Esploro only supported loading assets in OAI, but not in XOAI. XOAI is just, let's just say it's just kind of OAI a little bit, but containing more information, which is what I wrote next. The XOAI contained more information, as in two situations. It included the link to the digital file, the bit stream, and it also included the asset organizational unit affiliation. So in this case, I needed to use something that was not a straight OAI, Dublin core import, but instead, I had to go get the information myself, normalize it in some way, and then make it useful for our Esploro instance. And a side effect of this was it also allowed us, since we were doing this ourselves, allowed us to run the two systems in parallel for about 6 months, where the person who entered information into DSpace then wouldn't have to double entry that information into Esploro. But instead, I, created a system that would just grab that information as they inputted it, and then we could port it over to Esploro. And, I think the basic workflow for harvesting data in this case was very similar to the content DM example, but instead of using the set specs, we were using record IDs. And so the workflow for that, if you're creating your own script, is to create a text file of the record IDs and then loop over those record IDs and append them to the base URL, which allows you then to download the XOII records and then normalize the data and save the data to file. Another IRL example was an attempt. I guess I put that spoiler alert. We ended up discontinuing this project, but we were interested in piping the EAD data directly from Archives West into Primo VE. And I think actually I have a thing for that. So, but let me just move that. Oh no. Move this for a second over to here, and you can see why I started looking at this data and realizing that, there is no way, well, obviously it's EAD data, right? But I didn't really know what that meant at first. So I had to go look at the data and see what I could do with this, right? So I said, oh, creator title, summary, repository access. This all kind of looks like something I could get into a DC file, right? A Dublin core file. But then we have some other things: biographical note, a very long one at that, content description. This kind of looks more like MARC record, almost like, summary information, something I could do with that. But then there was all this administrative information related. And then came this part that really sort of made my life difficult, right? It's trying to get all of this box folder container description into a file that would make any kind of sense. So the only way that this was going to be possible would be, and sorry, that's probably making you seasick. to get the data ourselves and crunch it as much as we could. And in this case, I tried using a straight XML import profile within Primo VE. I got pretty far, but at the end of the day, we decided it just, wasn't really worth it to spend that much time on it. So what we already had was working well, and the value add of the extra information just wasn't there right then. So, but it's definitely an example where you might try to get your own data and do your own thing with it in a way that the other system's not going to allow for it. So, and since we started talking about transforming data, that's kind of the next thing after you get it. You're going to need to transform it in some way. Transform or normalize, I'm basically using those in the same way. I feel like in the library world, we're not really doing like, statistical flattening or anything like that, but most all of what at least most all what I have done thus far in terms of normalizing data is some type of find and replace, whether that be through regular expressions or normalization rules, or a script that would actually kind of incorporates either one or both of those. And I'm also still not here. Okay, so going back to MarcEdit, it has a wonderful find and replace functionality for MARC records. And you can see you check the box and you can use regular expressions with that. So in this case, I was attempting to just change some dates around if they were included in brackets. It seemed to work fine. Then there is discovery import profiles in Alma Primo. In this case, it's about constructing the links to the thumbnail, right? And so in this situation, you can define parameters, or you can define variables, and then you can reconstruct a string to include those variables, which ends up being a URL, which can be a link to something. So in this case, linking parameter 2 was a variable where I was collecting the collection name from the DC identifier. Parameter 3, I was collecting the ID from the DC identifier, and then kind of stitching that back together where the highlighted parts are to create that thumbnail link. And you can kind of see it in this URL up here where those two components would have been the macaw and the 427 to bring all that together. Okay, then there are just straight Primo VE normalization rules. And this is where we make MARC data conform to the display, our display wants and needs in Primo VE. And in this case, this was a rule that runs over the OCLC number. It matches, it provides a match, and then upon match, it performs a function over the data that's there in the 035. So it matches on the 035A, and then if there is that prefixed parenthetical of OCOLC, it removes that. And then if there is a further prefix of ON, it removes that. And then it performs a trim function to remove any leading and trailing spaces, and then finally dumps that into the display. And what it ends up doing here is taking a display like this, where you have essentially a duplicate, but they're not being recognized as duplicates because they have this prefixing, and just converts all of that to one single 10-digit number without any kind of prefixing or labeling, because we already have a field label there. So all kinds of things you can do. Okay, and then getting close to the end here, folks. This is just doing the same type of thing with scripting. And this is when I was mapping old data to the new structure. This was, again, that DSpace to Esploro situation where I had to find every set spec that was being used in the data and remap all of those set specs to the new Esploro organizational unit affiliation. So just it's basically a find and replace of sorts. Oh, yes. And then XSL. So XSL, extensible style sheet language transformations. This is kind of the holy grail of transforming XML data. Basically, it's XML language that uses XPath to rearrange elements of an XML document. Or to boil that down a little bit more, it takes it's the XSLT is code that you can add to or you can interface with the original XML, push those both to an XSLT processor, and then out comes a new document or a new document format. And in this case, you can see this is just Alma letters, which is a very good example of XSL that most of us use all the time. And so what you have here is a function that says, go find the notification data items, physical item display for printing, available items, available item, call number through XPath, and then put it into this place here and draw a box around it, right? So that's just one quick example of something we can do, and most of us are doing kind of on a regular basis within Alma letters through XSL. All right. Closing thoughts. I had this written as random thoughts to begin, but I guess I'll call them closing now. So now that you have these methods to go get data and normalize your data and save your data, I've found that it's a good practice to think about archiving your data on a regular basis. So you have all the tools to sort of recreate the fetching and fixing and storing of data. So I've kind of termed this as an escape plan. So if um, tomorrow funding gets cut, which, whoa, that's not that big of a um, surprise these days. But let's say we have to close up Esploro tomorrow. Well, I need to get all of the data out in the way I want it, right? And so I have already got a ready-made system to go and get that data and to make it look the way I want. So I can run that at any time. I can run it on a regular interval or just when I need to. Trim is a very helpful function. It sure is. It saved some of my work on numerous occasions, and I've heard other people talk about it too. It's just very good to get rid of those extraneous spaces around your data to make everything look and conform. Use CSV. And usually you get an option between CSV and Excel. I think CSV is the better way to go. It doesn't truncate leading zeros or turn things into scientific notation or change your text into date format or anything like that you didn't ask it to in the first place. So, and then last but not least, document and comment everything, right? So make sure that you have a handoff plan in case you need to give this project to someone else, and make sure that all of your code is commented well so that when you come back to it next year, you can actually remember what in the heck you were talking about. And then questions. I think we actually do have time left. Questions, comments, feedback. What else? What did I miss? What else can the audience recommend for migrating, using, and storing library data? Obligatory. Oh, I can put the notes here, but I also put a works consulted here. I want to make sure, I don't know, Bonnie's here. Make sure that I did note that I have consulted the Migrating Library Data, a practical manual from editors Banerjee and Parks, and then some other the Library of Congress items that I talked about. So that concludes. Anybody have anything to add?
Like, I'm not sure if you can see the chat. We've got a thank you, great presentation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll stop sharing in case anybody wants to mention something else. Or Amy, I can just give it back to you.
Thank you very much. Anything else from folks? I'm seeing a lot of thank yous in the chat. Thank you very much, Blake, for sharing all that information. Folks are very appreciative. Gonna wait a few more seconds to see if anyone else has any updates. Any general systems updates or comments folks would like to share?
I actually just had a thought came to me to ask Blake. Is that all right if I jump in?
Yes.
Okay. Blake, what do you recommend for someone newly starting for metadata? I'm teaching someone how to kind of get their head around metadata broadly. I was thinking of, diving into XML and using Dublin Core, but I kind of wanted to touch your expertise and see what you thought.
I guess what are you trying to get them to do with it?
Primarily, just get them comfortable. Like this is for full reference, this is a student, so we're talking like very very introductory, and just to getting them comfortable with the concept of metadata and getting them writing some like light standards. So getting them and more of the cataloging aspect of it. So
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, surfing records is always, my first place
mm,
to start, just to get yourself comfortable with what the data is.
hmm
When we did move a bunch of our stuff from DSpace to Esploro, it was really helpful for me to have, of course, our the cataloger that did our electronic theses and dissertations, you know, very close by because
okay.
he was extremely comfortable and not comfortable, what's the word? Familiar with the data and how it had changed over time, right?
Okay.
And so there are lots of fields that we used to use that we don't use anymore, some that
Yep.
got migrated, some that didn't, and there were just all of these caveats. So, I mean, if you're talking cataloging, I would partner that person with a cataloger and
Yep.
soak that knowledge up.
Perfect. No, that's a great idea. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or thoughts folks would like to share? We've got a recommended resource in the chat for basic mark. And I think that might be it for folks. Checking one more time. The next systems call will be on April 10th. And it looks like that's everything. Thank you so much for joining today, everyone. I'll get the recording up probably early next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.